Warning, this podcast typically features spoilers and strong opinions. Proceed with caution.
Welcome back to Then a Moment, the podcast where two lifelong storytellers talk about stories. I'm Pavi Proczko, audiobook narrator, author, actor, singer, etc.
And I'm Colin Funk, a childhood development expert and teaching artist.
Had a little trouble there.
Forget what I do, you know.
And today we're going to be talking about Carmen,
the opera. If you didn't know
one of the most famous operas.
Yes.
Specifically
the production at the Lyric Opera.
The Lyric Opera.
In Chicago.
Yep. So we're excited to talk about that and get a little classical. But first, let's talk about our moment of the week.
Sure.
You got one first? You go.
Sure. Okay. Well, we've been watching season 2 of Schmigadoon, also known as Schmicago.
Yeah.
And it's great. If you don't know Schmigadoon, it is so stupid, but it is a show where these two people find themselves in a real-life musical, and it is so silly. And season 2, they've moved from the old classic happy musicals to the dark Fosse musicals, including Chicago, Cabaret, and my favorite musical of all time, Pippin, which, honestly, my favorite moment, like they season 2 starts, they get to the new Schmigadoon, Schmicago location, and all of a sudden there's a note playing and some organ music, and I know immediately, I'm like, oh.
I mean, he did. He said out loud, he's like, oh, it's Pippin.
The second it happened.
I mean, this show is like
excited.
Musical theater nerds heaven, because it's just like the spoofs of all of the songs are spot on. You know exactly, if you know anything about musicals, you know exactly what song they are making fun of every single time.
One or two songs.
Sometimes they like mash them together.
But I mean, we're only like 3 episodes in.
2, I think. Yeah.
2, and I mean, I've been so happy with all the Pippin references sprinkled in there. I'm like, ooh, you're doing it
heavy on the Pippin for sure.
So far, and I'm
heavy on the Pippin.
not mad about it. So that is my moment of the week.
Yeah, awesome. My moment of the week. What did I say I was going to do?
The story you're currently narrating?
Yes, the story I am currently narrating. That's right. That's what I was going to do. As I say in the introduction, I am an audiobook narrator, and I, of course, love all my children equally, and I love all of the books that I narrate. But there's one in particular that I've really come to adore, and I read the first one last year called Breaker of Horizons. And the second one, I've just started it, and I just am remembering how awesome it is. And there's it's this little axolotl is the main character.
Oh,
it's like this little like salamander man, and it's like he's actually a human that gets like put into a monster's body and is like.
I mean, that's what I thought.
Of course, duh. And he's like trying to kind of gain. He was like born in some off world that didn't do very well. It's like he's the poorest of the poor, and he won a lottery, and he gets to like go to this other planet, which turns out is Earth. Spoiler. And he's like a monster that's supposed to like part of this incursion, and it's all very lit RPG. Look up lit RPG. Most of my books are lit RPG. Just look that up. You will fall down a rabbit hole. It's really interesting.
We'll do a full episode.
We'll do a full episode on that because we have thoughts, but. This story is really excellent, and I just love this relationship that he has with this creature that like lives in his mind called a Sophont, and her name is Sophia the Sophont. But she basically kind of like is connected to the system that has descended upon Earth that is kind of game-like. And so he gains levels, and she guides him, and they've developed this really neat relationship. And he has real wants and needs. Who would have thunk? Really important for storytelling.
What?
And I really love it, and I think he's really charming. So I'm very excited to keep going with that.
Nice. Well, maybe I'll actually... I don't listen to many of
No, he doesn't listen to most of my books.
You just do so many.
I do so many.
And the genre's not. It's just not my favorite.
Right.
And that's
not your cup of tea. But this
Not to say they're not
one's
good,
actually
they're
like, if
just-
I was to say like to get into like a lit RPG, especially System Apocalypse, another subgenre,
very specific.
very, very niche. This is one of them. This is like the one to be like, if you're like more literary, you should do this. This is
Well, maybe we'll do.
bridges
well,
it much better.
We'll decide what
We'll
we're gonna
decide.
do for
Yeah,
later,
it'll be great.
but-
Wonderful. So let's get into Carmen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, why don't you give us a little synopsis?
Okay, synopsis. So picture it. Sicily, 1922. No, that's the Golden Girls reference for everyone watching or listening, because you can watch or listen. Anyway, okay, so the scene opens in Seville, Spain, and we're outside this cigarette factory, and there's all these like men, and it's the break of the workday. It's the siesta time, and they're waiting for all the ladies to come out of the cigarette factory. Men are not allowed there. Inside, because they need to gets hot in there. They need to get comfortable. It's a very specific detail they give in the script, interestingly. Anyway, they're waiting for Carmen, and she's this Roma lady who charms them, and maybe she has magical powers, and she has maybe there's like rumored that she takes lovers to all the time, and people are always aspiring to be that. So she comes out and charms everyone. The day goes on. There's like soldiers they're watching. One in particular, Don José, is watching as well, and is trying to not pay much attention. But then she gives him the rose at the end. She like catches him looking at her, and she chooses him as her lover, kind of like being all flippant and teasing all the people around. She goes back in, gets into a fight, comes out, and gets arrested. It's unclear whether she actually was the one who started, but she gets arrested, gets fired, and Don José, the one that she chose, is now tasked with keeping guard over her, and she promises to love him if he just lets her go. And we'll talk about that a little bit. It's interesting, the wording that they use. It's, of course, all in French. And wordplay in another language is interesting. But so he goes along with it. She escapes. He gets arrested as well. And this whole kind of like, you imagine this torrid love affair begins, where he ends up defecting from the army. He deserts and he joins these rebels that she's part of, and it's this kind of on again, off again, very tumultuous relationship. And then they eventually break up, sort of, and he leaves because his mother's dying, and he should go to his mother, and he says, "I'll be back," after they have this big argument. And she, of course, goes off with the Toreador because maybe she didn't love him at all, ever, or whatever. Not sure. It's vague. We'll get to that too. And then in the end, he comes back and then kills her after she declares that she loves the Toreador instead, and will be true to him anyway after having... She's like, does all this fortune telling and everything, but the fact is it's on again, off again, very tumultuous love story. He kills her in the end. Very, very tragic.
Yes.
Whew, it's a wild ride.
Yeah.
What did you know about Carmen going in?
I had heard the famous song, which it's...
I mean, everybody knows.
C2...
Yes. Even you know it.
You know it.
It is Habanera. That's like short name. It's that dum 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 dum. It's like everybody knows, because
very
I mean, it's like
famous.
watching this opera is like watching
there's so many,
an episode of Sesame Street.
So many songs that you know.
Mm-hmm. Like the Toreador song.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, no, that's not it.
Was that?
It's
No, that's- oh my gosh,
that's a different opera.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's Rigoletto. But there's gosh, how does it go? It's so famous, we've forgotten how it goes. Anyway, if you look it up, you'll know it's like the Toreador thing. It's like really very, very famous. It's in every like Looney Tunes. You'll see it. It's everybody knows these.
Dun, 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 dun,
Yes.
dun, dun, dun,
Dun, dun, dun, dun, dun, dun, dun.
There it goes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then there's another one too. It's like the very famous, like right at the beginning, they start the whole thing out with it. It's very boisterous.
There was at least 3 or 4 that I knew, and I'm not an opera person, so I didn't know them as like, oh, it's this opera tune that I like.
Yeah,
They're
you
just
just
like
know it
songs
as,
that
like-
like have shown up on Looney Tunes and Sesame Street and
So super, super famous stuff.
yeah.
Um,
And it was 3.5 hours.
it's
long?
3.5 hours long. Yeah. There's
With
2 intermissions.
2 intermissions, so it's very long.
Beautiful sets. That's probably why it's so long. They have to change out these enormous, complicated sets.
Yeah.
I had seen it twice before. Once at Lyric before,
Right.
which was interesting, and then once at College of DuPage.
Oh.
And I enjoyed both of them
Yeah.
before, too. So all in all, what did you think?
As far as an opera, like I said, I'm not the biggest opera fan. I tend to get bored pretty quickly. The medium of opera, I've kind of decided it as a storytelling medium loses my interest pretty quickly.
Sure.
Because it depends on
It's really
people
antiquated.
It wants people to sit and just like enjoy the voices and enjoy the ambiance and it feels like I should be able to like sit there and chat with someone through the whole thing and it's not story forward, it is spectacle forward, it is music forward,
Right.
it is voice forward, and I tend to get bored, I tend to get sleepy. Even when I like the music, even when I like the performers and the voices, there tends to be lots of lulls. Especially, it's hard when there's no like reality grounding it. Where if there's no spoken lines, if there's no real element of reality and through line to a story, it's really hard to keep my interest. Especially when you're asking me to sit there for 2.5, 3.5 plus hours.
Not to mention how it's written in a bygone era, so you get a lot of these tropes that are specific to the time. Like we went to see Hansel and Gretel there, and it's like the way that it ends is like everybody loves God, and it's like, oh, we're just very good. It's a really straight. Everything is Hansel and Gretel for the story until like that last moment where they have this weird like prayer to everything and we've won, we're all good, even though it's like there were questionable moral things that happened throughout. You needed to have this lesson at the end that was exactly like this because that was what they did at the time. Another example was I saw Orpheus and Eurydice there, and it's like an old like Gluck opera from like, it's like Baroque. It's like really, really old. And the story of Orpheus, of course, is that he goes to go get Eurydice. She's died. He's promised that if he can get her out of Hades without looking at her, he said, guide her out without looking at her, can't turn back and look, then they'll be able to get out. And of course, like right before they are able to escape, he turns around, sees her, and she disappears, and he never gets. They never get out of Hades.
The plot of Hades.
A tragedy. Town. It's the plot of Hades Town. Yeah, really tragic. I love the Orpheus myth, but it's like it's really beautiful, like tragic. But in this Gluck opera, they did not end operas like that. Operas ended happily. So the goddess of love comes down and just brings them both back to life and says, but true love wins against everything. And so it's just kind of like, bleh. It's like the whole opera is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice until that last moment. So you get these like weird tropes like that.
Right. They have these certain conventions in operas that like really just, they break the storytelling, they break the structure because of certain cultural expectations.
Yeah,
I would
and
say.
they don't update them when you go to a place like the Lyric Opera, right?
wouldn't.
You kind of have to wait for someone to make the musical version, and then you can like see a more updated version of it.
Like while it's interesting to look at the art form in context of the time period it's from. I mean, that's interesting. It does. It just
is
makes
interesting. It's really frowned upon to change something like that too.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Just like it does make it harder, I think, in this world where we're used to watching, 10 seconds, 30 seconds of content at a time.
Right.
That like
it's
has
really
like a
hard
full
to do it now.
story arc, and it's all very cohesive
Yeah.
and very, very niche and very one subject, and then you're like sitting in an opera trying to pay attention the whole time. And
Sure.
it's hard for, I think, contemporary audiences, including myself, to really...
I mean, me too. And I am interested in opera. I'm,
you're much more.
I'm much more into it. I've always liked, at least musically, I'm studying to try to sing it kind of independently. Not for anything in particular, but it's, I've always liked it. And even so, it's still really hard to like sit through. It's hard.
With that all being said though, Carmen, I think, is I've seen a handful of operas throughout my life, and it is the one I think I've liked the best in terms of the story and the way that it's set up. I think the story structure, it feels more contemporary than other ones I've seen. It keeps my interest, even though it was 3.5 hours. I never found myself like getting bored or getting lost or getting confused or there was a couple times where I was like, okay, this is an opera thing. But like, for the most part, I enjoyed the story.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that is that I recognized so much of the music.
Right.
But I think the plot just moved forward and it made sense. And
I think it was interesting though, because I think we both left this production feeling like it wasn't that good. Like the production itself wasn't great. And I think that's kind of where we landed, where it was like, even though we were watching this kind of like lukewarm, sorry for anyone who's listening, who works there, blah, 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 it's not for everyone. But it's just, I found myself disappointed in the production.
Right.
And still, as you say, it's like, of any of the operas I've ever seen, this one continues to be the one where it's like, it's theater. Yeah. It is a play. There are actually lines, like you say. It's like really hard to get into to operas.
Lines.
There's actual speaking lines. There's a script. There's a libretto. There's and it really starts touching on these like psychological elements. We can talk more about that maybe too in a minute. But it's and by no means do I think we left being like that was a terrible production. No.
But because the show is pretty engaging on its own, it was easy to see the choices the production made that were less than ideal.
Yeah, because there's so much that's written in to the story that we didn't see taken advantage of, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what were some things that worked? Let's start there. What worked? I think first off, all of the scenes that were smaller scenes between two people. There were so many like these smaller scenes, like two people or like there's four people. Really, really interesting. You start kind of seeing the growth of like the musical stage there.
So in Pavi's synopsis, he didn't mention this the B plot essentially, which is this romance between Don José.
Don José.
But they pronounce
they pronounce it José. Yes, of course, because it's French. It's in French, but takes place in Spain.
In Spain, yes. But he is visited by Micaela, who comes bearing a letter from his mom, who says, I want you to get married, and I want it to be to this girl who sent you this letter, Micaela.
Yeah.
And so they have this moment at the beginning where they're like, okay, great, we'll do that. We'll get married. And that was before Carmen really sinks her.
Yeah, it's like right before the fight, and he gets saddled with Carmen.
Right. Yeah. So, but those moments, they're kind of scattered throughout the show. The moments between Don José and Micaela are so excellent.
It's interesting that it as like a B plot, it has some bearing on the plot. It's interesting I didn't mention it because she's actually my favorite character. It's like, it is my favorite part of the play.
It is.
Everything with her.
It's certainly integral to the
it is,
line.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So
it's part of the details for sure.
That storyline, was so, I mean, like every moment, especially with Michaela, was either like one person, two person.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a couple at that, but like all of her songs are so intimate, and they did it really well. They kept the staging really minimal. They kept it really intimate.
Yeah.
And I thought those moments were so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it really made that relationship, it made me like root for that relationship, making it even more tragic when, you know, Don José like really gets caught up in this, like in the passion of this love affair with Carmen, the passion being, you know, the fiery, lusty part of it, but also like this, like they get very angry with each other. They're very like oil and water. They don't really get along. They don't really mesh as people. So he lets kind of jealousy take over in the end. But like you said, any of those moments between those two. There's also another great. One of my favorite scenes is Carmen is waiting for Don José to get out of jail. But her friends they come in and they're like, oh, it's time for another one of our little outings where we go and do
They're like smugglers.
things.
Yeah, they're like smugglers, rebels, sort of.
Yeah.
Against like the powers that be, and they're like, hey, it's time to smuggle some smuggle. We're gonna smuggle some rifles. And they have this like awesome quartet. It's like really, really clever,
really cool.
really, really cute. And there's like really interesting things in there where it's like they're talking about how it's like, oh, come on, we really need you, let's go. And she's like, I know I really want to, but I promised him I'd stay, and I always keep my promises. And I think that makes it a really interesting story point where, as I mentioned, she talks about like, you know, if she early on tells Don José, hey, if you let me go, I will meet you at this bar that I know, this tavern, a friend of mine owns it, and I will love you. And basically she's like promising to sleep with him, basically. Yeah. And he's like, okay, if you say so, I am intoxicated by you now, and so I will do that. So if you keep this promise, and she says, listen, I'm a Roma, I keep my promises. And so she's like, there's like a little bit of throughout the whole story, there's a little bit of this like, did she do it just to keep the promise? Does she love him? There's something that probably draws her into it still. Yeah. Something that that made her choose him early on with the rose and you know, throws a rose at him early on.
I think the way the show is written, it really does feel like there is some sort of infatuation or desire from her. Yeah. That drives it, whether or not it is the soul driving factor is kind of in question.
And so it's really interesting seeing that dynamic play out where she's waiting for Don José to come out. They haven't even had their tryst yet, really. And she's just sitting at this bar waiting after this big party where, you know, I'm sure she's like messing around or flirting anyway. Right. But she's like, no, I promised I'd wait. Even though the rebels are like, but we're going to have fun. We're going to go do this thing. She's not going to go. And
they're like, no, it's better if women are around when we're doing mischievous things.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, I know it would be better, but I need to wait. And they're like, okay, well, you need to, recruit him then.
But like that production, they did it well. I think it takes those little scenes, like just those four friends and Carmen, and they like the interactions between them. It's such a playful song, and they were having fun, and it was like you saw in Carmen this like, oh, I am torn. Like I said I'd wait, and I'm gonna wait. She made her choice, but she is like. You can see
she's kind of missing out.
This is my life. These are my friends. This is my family. This is what I do. And she says something like, "I'm not going to be able to convince this guy to come with.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen. He's stupid.
He's not. Yes, he's dumb, and he doesn't really belong in this life. Yeah. And that theme comes back again and again.
Yes.
Another thing, we always. Recently we've been we sometimes talk about this, I think, but it's like the design is really great.
I mean, lyric.
They have the money to throw at it, man.
Never seen a show where, well, I would say the sets. I don't know if
the
I
sets,
would say
right? Sure,
the full design.
Yeah,
because
right.
I wasn't in love with like costuming,
right?
Particularly this. And we can talk about that more. But
And maybe we should, because I think that'll go into the what doesn't work file.
Sure.
A bit. Yeah.
But in terms of set, I mean, insane.
Yeah,
beautiful.
really beautiful, huge, like
Act
2-story.
3 shows up, and it's this like, right, it's Act 3. Yes, Act 3.
Act 3, 2, 4?
No, 2 is the bar.
2 is the
3,
bar.
it opens
oh
up.
my gosh, it opens up and it's just
Yeah,
like
it
it's
opens up.
outdoor. Oh my gosh,
After
it's
the
so
second
beautiful. Yeah.
Intermission, curtain goes up, and it's like huge, like cliff sides, like we're up
Yeah.
in the mountains with a moon behind them. It is gorgeous. I mean,
It's
it feels like
beautiful.
you're outside. Like
Yeah.
it's a beautiful set.
Feels like the moon is the only thing lighting, like the full moon is lighting the stage. It's really gorgeous.
And there's in the first couple acts, there's this they do this beautiful like arches throughout the back that look like a town. And look like,
and they use that again and again. You know, at the beginning they have those arches, and then at the end it ends up being outside the arena for the Toreador, but it actually just looks like
feels
the
like
arena. And that brings me to like like story wise, that idea of having the bullfight is happening in the arena, and Don José and Carmen are having their last confrontation
right. Yeah.
outside the arena. They haven't made it into the arena, but they're the bullfight. That's actually the bullfight that we are watching a bullfight, and that's so interesting.
It's very interesting. It's interesting that it's written and designed that way, the show itself.
Right.
And this might be a good segue to talk about how, even though there are parts of the show, we kind of talk about them together, parts of the show that were written or designed well that maybe
didn't execute so well.
We can read it. We obviously, like, it was very clear that that's what was happening. And even with it was clear they were still making that choice,
Right.
Lyric. But I would say the way that Lyric executed this parallel between bullfight in the arena versus Carmen, Don José outside the arena, like getting into this very passionate fight.
Yeah.
They didn't. It was. I would say lacking, and that happened because the blocking was really stale.
I think that's my number one. Didn't work. There's something with the direction, and I know, like, especially opera houses, and especially if this is some kind of like touring production, it gets complicated.
Of course.
And for those of you who don't know, the opera has like a chorus that they work full time. Lyric specifically has a chorus that they work there full time. They are sometimes the minor roles, but they are almost never the lead roles, because the lead roles are from a different pool of artists entirely. So you want a full-time job, you are in the union, and you get to like audition to be in
full-time salaried positions.
the chorus, and you're in each of the operas, and you're in some of the musicals, and there are very specific rules about what they can and cannot make you do for your protection, and also sometimes to the detriment of the art, I think sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Getting in hot water with the
Anytime
the unions,
there are
but
limitations like that.
it ends up being in conflict with what, say, a director might want specifically. So I don't know exactly why it is, but something about the direction.
There could be just
extenuating circumstances or timing. Like, it could just be time. They don't spend that much time rehearsing because they're just kind of like there all the time. They come in, they rehearse a few times, and then it's like, well, we're just
they only have a certain amount of time with the chorus. There's an adult chorus. This show and some shows have also
a child chorus,
children's chorus.
Yeah. So the direction sometimes just didn't work out. Like, at the very beginning, you have all these men waiting outside the cigarette factory on their siesta, and I want
military men.
Yeah, they're military men and workers from around town, and they need to be waiting. We need to know. It's like, they're waiting for Carmen.
I mean, they talk about it. It's in the script. They say, like, oh, we get so excited when these women come out of the factory. We don't get to see them while they're in there, so we get this peak of women when they all come out.
Yes, and we know that inside they maybe were topless because it gets so hot in there, and that's why we're not allowed in there. And we get to like imagine that, and it was eerily silent on the stage as there's all this like commotion maybe happening. It's like been directed to have all this movement, and there's like a town sort of,
The
and
first like 3 minutes of it.
yeah, and it's just like silent, and I was like, what is? I want to hear.
Yes.
I want to hear kind of the raucousness of the city, and maybe this is in conflict with what usually happens in operas, where it's not usually that realism, where you don't have like in a musical you might go and you might hear like the sounds of the town.
Sure.
And in an opera you might not, but they
but they
really
do
could
it-
have afforded it.
Yes, I agree. I think the use of vocalizations, use of just like general crowd sounds,
Yeah.
it really communicates so much in terms of, because they're really like they're trying to paint a picture at the beginning of what this town feels like, what these townspeople are like, and they're coming out, and
This is fun for them. This is their one like shining moment of entertainment. That 15 minutes they get to just hang out outside at the hottest part of the day.
especially an opera where they're like, we're living in this song is painting a picture of the town, of the life,
Yeah.
of a snapshot of the life, and to like kind of flatten that part out of it is to take away a part of what makes that engaging.
Yeah.
Because that's all that some of those songs at the beginning feel like. We're just here to kind of like live this moment just like these townspeople are.
Right.
And if we're not like feeling the energy of the actual townspeople,
Then we lose exactly
it.
what the big deal is when
Yeah.
Carmen comes out, because we're just like, she came out and I was like, so what? Like it doesn't.
they're
She
not
gets a
silent.
song.
They're not silent the whole show.
No.
It's not like
No, yeah.
it's not like this is consistent throughout the whole. There's like a couple
moments where they're like,
moments.
yay, they call out. And I was like, that's so strange that you called out right then. And there's like just dead silence the rest of the time.
And maybe that's something that, you know, as a musical theater actor, we just know.
I'm just, like, sensitive
I
to
know
it.
that like when there's a group thing, you're just vocalizing.
Yeah.
Like you're told all the time, like, no, guys, come on, you guys are doing something.
Yeah.
Make some sounds.
This
Like,
is-
I feel
this
like
is
as
not a
beaten,
high-class
if you
group of
do-
people.
If you do musical theater and you're in the chorus, you're so used to vocalizing
Yes.
in any dead space.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do.
Right.
I don't think that's the same in opera. So it really feels like someone had to be like, okay, you say yay, then you say yay. That's what it feels like.
Yes.
Whether or not that's actually what happened, they might have said like, oh, add in some vocalizations, and that's all people felt comfortable with because they're not used to it.
Right.
And you know, I've been there.
Sure.
I've been in shows
Sure.
where I'm like, oh, I feel so
So
weird doing it.
Doing it, yeah. Especially when you
get used to it.
you do have to like dodge the important parts too. It's also not mic'd, so
That's true.
so you can't really be doing that over like an aria per se, at least not very loudly. And I'm sure you'd get some complaints. It's like I can't hear the orchestra because it is all just acoustic, you know. So there are other circumstances, of course, but there's things you can do to make that work. You can time it right. And I mean, even just down to the way the chorus was moving, it was like they didn't know how to move their bodies on the stage. They're just kind of like schlepping. They weren't told where to go or what they were doing. They were just kind of like moseying around and standing in weird lines. I mean, it's like number one sin, just standing in these
standing in
lines on a
lines.
stage. Like,
They
do
do that a
not
lot.
stand in a line on stage. Oh my God.
It's really interesting. The whole show opens with they like open the curtains and there's like a tableau.
Yeah.
There's like people in all these positions. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, what a beautiful place to do it at the Lyric. Tableaus where people are just like standing in weird positions. Sometimes I'm like, okay. But like, you open to this like beautiful set and you see this town and people are in these positions. It like opened and it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then those, I would say, not just that first group number, there were group numbers in every act where people just like found their spot and like sat there.
Yeah.
Didn't move, didn't do anything, didn't add any life to anything. And it's not their fault. It just,
No, yeah.
and part of it is they need to have all the people on stage at the same time. And they need to put them all in the same, or all in places where you can see everyone.
Yeah.
And they probably have minimal time to do it, but it really does.
It really like it was to the detriment of the storytelling, really.
And I don't feel like if you see, we've seen some a couple of the musicals that they've done.
Yeah.
They don't do that for the musicals.
No, the
That
musicals
never
are
happens.
different. Yeah.
And even Hansel and Gretel did not feel like that really ever. That was very dynamic for the most part.
So I wonder if it was just like a directorial thing. maybe they weren't there, or I don't know. I don't know what the details are.
Who knows?
Yeah.
With Carmen, they might just be like, this is a fan favorite, so we're giving it less rehearsal time.
Yeah, I mean, they've done it 100 times. I saw a production there. They did it, they've done it tons of times. And even
the lead has been Carmen.
Has been Carmen there before.
And many other places. She's done Carmen a handful of times.
And
that's what you do in opera. When you're famous for that role, you do it.
You just do it again and again and again. And they reused a lot of the sets. They reused a lot of the costumes. And so it's like the person who's directing doesn't even have that much to work with, too.
Yeah.
So, and that might be one thing that didn't really work so well, too, is the costuming was a little strange because it kind of was like between times. Because they set it in like Franco's Spain, which actually works story-wise. That would be just fine.
Doesn't bother me.
Doesn't bother me at all. And it just like wasn't, like there was a confusing kind of cluster of costumes, especially in like the tavern scene when there's like this like flamenco, very traditional flamenco stuff. And I was like, are you fancy or not fancy, or what is happening here?
It's a lot of the same, especially in the tavern scene, a lot of that same silhouette, but in a range of fabrics that would communicate to me different formality or different class level.
Like you have like Les Miserables, like just the most destitute people, as well as like the very beautiful yes,
dresses made out of like Carmen's was like red,
just like
satin.
Silk or satin. Yes, I mean it's really. I was like,
beautiful.
Where are we? What is this? Yeah,
but not quite. I mean, I understand. I obviously understand they're trying to set Carmen apart.
Sure,
that's very
of course.
clear.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah. Very famous red dress. Carmen's red flamenco dress.
Looks great.
Yes, beautiful.
It confused me. I didn't know what it was trying to tell me.
Yeah, and I think that kind of specificity was like lacking in a lot of key points. Even, for example, at the very beginning, you had mentioned that you didn't realize which one Don José was. I knew only because I've seen it twice, but just
I didn't even see him the first.
He was so unassuming.
Gives him the rose?
Pay, right, and it was like he should be young, and he should be like, even if he needs to be like the kind of the goody two shoes, it's something he needs to be so hungry for that affection.
Yeah.
He needs to be hungry for that and lustful over Carmen. So we need to see him having discovered her either by the throwing the rose. That's like the moment where I've cast the spell on you. She even says that.
Yes.
I cast the spell on you already. I need to see it happen. If he's not already kind of like just dumbfounded and dumbstruck at her so that she actually chooses him. That's why she chooses him, right? There's this young boy over there. Oh, look at him. And of course they can't have like a young boy because it's like a really demanding vocal part and it's like really heavy.
That's fine.
But there needs to be something that we see, that's the guy.
Right.
And she finds him and there's a spark moment. And there was none of that.
No, I mean, it could have been a lot of things. It could have been a physicality. It could have been just movement during that scene. Just getting him to move.
Getting everybody else
sitting to stay. Like,
yeah,
give me some level changes
of all of the rest of the cast. You can use, even if you don't have spotlights, you can use everybody else on the stage to spotlight the person.
Yes.
Someone else on the stage. We don't have spotlights, so we're going to use how we design the staging to put them in a focal point.
But I don't think they either didn't spend a lot of time or it just like wasn't very good.
Yeah.
The staging when it was full group numbers.
Oh my God,
there was
that
nothing.
weird.
Nothing was ever. They never directed my eye toward what I was supposed to be looking at. Like I missed.
And they always used that stupid sawhorse. That like traffic horse thing,
which I didn't.
They kept bringing that out and like moving it to different places, and I was like, "Were you having?" It's a fine thing because sometimes they would bring it out and be like, "Oh, you can't touch the ladies. We're going to keep you behind it." Like they were trying to give it story elements, but I just kept thinking maybe like the cast, like the chorus, wasn't able to figure out how far downstage. They just kept like meandering, and they were like, "You can't pass this sawhorse. We're gonna put the sawhorse up. You're not going further downstage from the sawhorse. You just have to stay here."
So I don't think the sawhorse itself was a problem. That's just clear that if you're thinking like that, they didn't They didn't block it. If you're thinking, they put that sawhorse there because the actors couldn't stay
exactly.
there.
That's what it looked like.
That is a blocking problem. They could absolutely effectively use that sawhorse to create spaces. It helped create the picture during the Toreador entrance at the end.
Right, that made sense.
They used them effectively at a couple points. But you're even thinking that's clear. There's a deficiency
there's
in the way they're making their stage
on.
pictures.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Another moment I thought of was when Escamillo, the Toreador, shows up the first time. He is supposed to be this. He comes into the tavern after Carmen has done her whole bit at the tavern also, and he mirrors her habanera. So like in Act 1, she does the habanera. She entertains everybody. She's the center of attention. She's so charming. And then Escamillo comes in Act 2, and he's like, look at me, I'm the Toreador. And he kind of does the same
I'm the
thing.
male version
and then
of her.
Right, and he chooses her the same way. They even mirrored it on stage. Actually, this is kudos, props to that. They did this really well. That Don José was sitting in the same place that Carmen was sitting in Act 2.
Yes, of course, I didn't notice Don José the first scene.
Right,
so
you
I
didn't notice,
make
but
the connection.
of course. But she's wearing like bright red, so we can see her.
Yes, very clear.
Very clear. And he comes in and they mirror the scene. But what I want is, in the same way that I want Don José to already be paying attention or have some spark, she needs to have a spark with Escamillo, because he comes in and she's already been waiting for Don José to get out of prison. She's had this whole interaction, or she's going to have this whole interaction with like her rebel friends. She has to be thinking like, oh my God, that's my match. That's the perfect match for me. And I'm waiting for this idiot.
Well, I think the whole point is like, they should let her have a moment of, she gets lost in it. She gets caught up. She gets caught up in the excitement just like everyone else.
Right.
And I really do feel like they were like, well, it's more nuanced than that. She feels this, and she's still thinking about Don José, and we want to, and like that's all that they did then. All that they did was have her sit and be like, like the whole time.
Yeah, she didn't even pay attention to him.
No, I literally thought she wasn't paying attention.
Or maybe like she wasn't in the room. I don't even know. It was just, it has to be so important because that's the guy she ends up with and ends up getting murdered for.
And I think this is a good example of a time where they didn't use, like they tried to paint a general picture. They're trying to like give you like, oh, there's this conflict within her. Because they're putting her in one spot and giving her one kind of mood the whole time, we're not seeing both of them. Instead of giving us a moment, a shift where we're like, we're living in this thing, and then like catching herself
and then a moment. And then a moment.
Exactly.
That's why these moments are so important. If you didn't know, that's why we called our podcast that. Because these moments hinge on those processes hinge on a moment.
Yes.
You actually need a moment to see Don José fall in love. You need a moment to see Carmen get lost in Escamillo.
Yes.
You need to see that moment. You need to pinpoint exactly when it happens. As an audience member, that's the only way we're going to see it. It can't be gradual like that.
Right. And I think the show is well written enough that we know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not difficult.
We just told you all the moments when it was supposed to happen. It's like written to be that way. It's like so clear.
Not because we know Carmen's that well. It's just from
watching
production.
it.
We know that that's what's supposed to happen.
Right.
Or that is what they were going for.
Right.
And just...
I think it's a really good play. It's like great. A really clear.
And it's one of those shows that I'm sure people will go and be like, "Oh no, I thought that, I read that," and I'm sure they will, because it is so well written and so like you can't implied.
Help.
It is you do kind of get it just from the show, and this is what like where we're very nitpicky and but the actual production choices don't. I don't think
they don't reflect the thing. Yeah, they don't reflect what the script is already saying.
They're not lifting it up.
They kind of drag it down. Exactly. It is being carried by the fact that it is well written.
Yes.
And that's like in direct opposition. We'll probably talk about this another time too. But we saw Into the Woods at Paramount Theater in Aurora. I mean, it's a beautiful production, but it's an interesting. It's exactly the opposite. Like we're sitting here watching Carmen, and we're thinking like, I can tell that this is a very good play, even though the production isn't doing it any favors.
Yeah.
And then we're watching Into the Woods, and I'm like, I know that I always loved this play, but I remember thinking like, it looks beautiful, and they're doing really, really well, and yet it's not working. Is this a bad play? Yeah. This is the first time ever that I was thinking like, is Into the Woods not great?
Yeah, well,
we'll have to talk about that in more depth.
We're going to see,
but it's an interesting.
We're slated to see the next.
We're slated to see the tour as it comes through
we'll
Chicago.
Talk about, we'll maybe compare them.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because I mean that old DVD is like one of the best things.
We'll compare all three.
All three together. But it's just an interesting how we can see that the story was. Like it's a really well written libretto. The play is very good,
yes.
And
despite seems really solid,
despite the production not quite living up to the promise of the script. Yeah, it's interesting. All right, let's move on to our superlatives, shall we?
Time for superlatives.
Superlatives.
We'll start with our
superlative
Oscar moment.
Oscar moment. Okay, yeah.
Do you have yours?
Yeah. I do. My Oscar moment is with Michaela, my favorite. I love Michaela. So there's this moment where Michaela sings this whole song right before she like comes back to find Don José when he's out with the rebels out in the desert, and his mother is dying, and she's so disappointed because Don José has like deserted and brought shame upon the family. But she like still loves him, and she's like, I hate Carmen for doing this to him. It was her fault. She did this. And when I go see her, I'm gonna tell her. She sings this whole beautiful aria about her. Like I'm gonna tell her about this, and I'm gonna pray to God that I get this revenge. Basically, my revenge is to be able to tell her to her face that you've done this evil thing. Then there's a argument between
Michaela's finally like,
Michaela
go.
finally like and
to Don José, and Don José's like, no, I'm not going to leave Carmen alone because I hate her, and I'm so jealous, I don't want her to be with this other person. And he's like real close to getting violent. I mean, he gets violent,
but he's gonna like. He has like a knife. He's gonna kill her maybe.
It might be deadly for sure.
Because he's like promising already, I'm gonna kill you before anyone else has you. Yeah. And Michaela suddenly, in the opportunity she has to actually get revenge on this woman, she sees this interaction and stops it. She reaches her hands out to Don José and intercedes there to tell him like, wait, I have one more thing to tell you. Your mother is dying, and we should go do this thing now.
Yeah.
And it's almost in an effort to save Carmen. Seeing this thing, she stops Don José from beating the hell out of Carmen, despite having just sung this whole song about wanting to get revenge on her. And it's just so poignant to have this kind of... it sounds so cliche these days, but like women having their backs, kind of a moment where she's like, I need to really
these days, but it's certainly
not cliche then. And I love that they added this in, but as they're leaving the stage, she just looks back to Carmen, and they just kind of give each other this little nod. It's the one interaction they kind of have together that instead of telling her off, she's just like, thank you. She says, yeah, I got you. Mm-hmm. And they leave, and I think it's just like beautiful moment. And I think I don't remember who the singer was, but I thought she performed it really beautifully. It's really great.
She really did. Yeah. I mean, she was maybe my favorite.
And then of course the music is like fantastic. Give it an Oscar.
Sure.
All right, what about you?
I am gonna give the Oscar moment to. So silly. There's one moment of choreography. Like some of the choreography, there's the tavern scene right at the Act 2 that we've talked about. And it starts with this big raucous party, missing vocalizations. It doesn't feel like a big raucous party. I'm like, are they setting up for something? Like it was a little confusing. But some like little bits of the choreography, they don't have very much in the show.
Yeah.
But that scene they have some, and there's one moment where like 4 different dancers get like lifted up and their legs just fly into the air with their big flamenco dresses and all like
it looks
land
so
one
good.
at a time on
It's
the
like
table.
on the beat, and it's like kick with these beautiful dresses. It's really something.
It just like made me hungry for more.
Yeah,
like really good.
because they weren't really
dancing.
well highlighted, and they were
they
like
weren't.
dancing their faces
they
off
were
the
dancing
whole
a lot
time
during that
and I just
scene.
like didn't even realize that there were dancers kind of until that moment.
Exactly.
And I was like, oh my god, they've been dancing the whole time. Oh shoot, wow, yeah, that was really beautiful. That was a really
Great way
very
to
cool choreography.
Use a moment to
Oscar.
really give it an Oscar.
All right, what about unearned moment?
I'm gonna go on a little tangent.
Yeah.
And talk about the subtitles.
Okay, yeah.
I appreciate subtitles at an opera. The show is in French. No one speaks French.
Right.
I mean, people do, but
Sure.
like the general
I
public,
don't.
it's
You
they're,
do a
they're
little
expecting
bit.
an English-speaking audience.
Yeah.
So they have English subtitles projected, super titles.
Yeah.
because they're
Super
over the
titles.
top.
Over the top. Right.
But the thing about the way they do it at Lyric is they keep it as minimal as possible because they want you to watch the stage. They want you to watch the actors and the stuff going on. I understand why they do it.
Yeah.
My problem is I'm really interested in the language, and especially in this show, I have, French is the language I studied. So it was really exciting for me to get to see a show where I actually understood a good chunk of the words and the language. And there's really beautiful wordplay in French. Je t'aime means both I like you and I love you, and has like a range of what you could mean when you use that.
Right.
And there's different versions of using words like I love you, I adore you, that they come up. There's
different connotations. And it's kind of what we talked about a little, whereas, she says, oh, I know, I promise I'll love you. Or it's like, oh yeah, I do love you. Oh, I adore you. It's like the way she says it. It's like, are you seeing love really? Mm-hmm. And so it kind of throws into question, like, what did she actually promise? What is she actually telling him?
It really adds. And of course, like in translation, they're never like, that's not Lyric's fault.
Sure. That English only has one way to say I love you.
Where we're not going to read, like when someone's like, whoever loves me will come with me. Well, no one would say that in English. So it feels weird, but that's not Lyric's fault. That just like, it makes the most sense because it's supposed to have a double meaning in that. Yeah. And, but the thing that bugs me about the subtitles is like, I'm listening and they repeat things multiple times. I mean,
it's an opera.
So there's the same things over and over again. They're not putting every word for every song translated onto the proscenium.
If they've already like sung the thing before and it's been translated
4 times,
you only see it one time, and you might not see it anymore.
And they don't leave it up there, not all the times.
Right.
Sometimes they did, but not every time. Or they leave like the last word. And sometimes they make specific choices based on their specific words. Yeah. And even though I know some French, like I don't remember, like, sung in an opera. It's not that easy to catch. I'm not fluent already, and being sung, it's hard to pay attention to. So it just like really bugs me when I'm like, I don't remember what they're saying or what choice that they're making and why what words they're using right now, because that would be really interesting to me. Or if they I just lost my train of thought. Or sometimes they say things like they use a character's name. Yeah. And I'm like, I recognize that they just said Carmen, and why didn't you put it in the super titles? And I'm like, am I not? Because then it makes me question in the moment. I'm like, oh, are we off? Is it off? Like, again, less so in this production, more so in, like this time I was like, they just left it off. But if you didn't know any French and couldn't like follow it at all,
and you just heard Carmen, and you're like, wait,
and you're like, wait, maybe we're off. There's something about it that like bugs me. Yeah, that I understand the choice to not word for word translate and put it up there.
Sure,
I get it, and I get it that it's tricky, and that a lot of time has been spent on it. There is just a handful of times that I really think especially with this show and the language and the play with language, I just think that it made it less appealing to me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thank goodness they have the synopsis always in the
Yeah,
in the program. We read it. You made a point of doing it this time, but like reading it before the opera
Beforehand.
started, so you could just like,
I'm usually
even if I
like-
don't follow the super titles,
I don't want to
know the story.
I'm usually like, I don't want to know spoilers. I don't watch previews for
Yeah.
movies. I like to go in fresh, but like I think for operas, I just need to go in and
Yeah,
read
I think
it.
maybe in the future too,
beforehand.
I'll go through and read like just the first because it was a 4-act opera. I would just read like the first 3 acts and then leave the 4th, so I could just like watch it,
Sure.
see how that goes. Of course, I knew how this one ended, but
So yeah,
Yeah.
I would say the super titles would be my unearned.
yeah, well, it makes a lot of moments unearned.
Right.
It's like it's hard to earn a lot of the wordplay and the depth of the libretto and the score. My unearned moment happens right at the end. So Don José has just stabbed Carmen, and she lies dying, and her blood spills on the sand outside the Toreador arena, and you hear everyone in the arena is like da 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 because he's just
Escamillo has
just also slain his bull.
Yes.
So that's the
again,
thing. It's
very
like
clear.
It's
the
interesting, right? It's like,
parallels.
who's the bull? Is she the bull, or is Don José the bull? I think Don José is the bull, and she was the Toreador and got gored. But Escamillo has
that's
just
up to it. That should be up to interpretation.
But Escamillo has just done it, and they're all singing, and then Don José screams out that he says, "Yes, it was me. I killed her." But in this production, and the last times I've seen it, every single time, they come out, they like pour out of the arena, and they're like celebrating, and there's all these people that are so happy, and then they just stumble upon this murder, and they're like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And they're all just like shocked, and they're screaming, and they're like clutching their pearls.
What a great moment.
And Escamillo comes out and sees his love on the ground, right? There's this beautiful moment, and then Don José admits that he's the one to do it.
Yes.
This production, he's screaming to no one. They just like sang backstage, and then nobody files out.
shows up.
No one shows up, and so
He's all alone.
He's all alone with her. It's just him and her body on the stage, and he's like, "Yes, it was me. Take me away. I killed her."
And maybe that was like in line with this. We're trying to look more at the psychological world of it. We're
Yeah,
trying to look at
maybe.
their personal neuroses instead
Right.
of like, I don't know.
It just didn't make sense, and it just made the moment goofy. It made it
it was so
weird to have him like call out to nobody.
Yeah, I agree.
There's no one for him to admit to, and
was
it's
very
so
weird.
important that you get to see this other arena, this other bullfight come out and witness the bullfight gone wrong on the other side and have that mirror. There's such good mirroring in the story, and they didn't use it. It
Yeah.
just made that moment so weird.
It doesn't need to be like I'm not somebody who's like, yes, you need to like wrap things up in a pretty little bow.
Yeah.
But you just missed an opportunity to like get.
Make this real. Make it mean something.
Yes.
What happens? I want to see Escamillo find that. Not that the Escamillo was that great, but as an actor at least. But it's just like,
Well, that's opera people.
I know,
I don't
opera
expect
people.
them.
But it's
But-
just like, I want to see you break down, because you're like, yeah, I just ruined everything. Everything I've ruined. My life has been ruined by this.
Yeah.
I'm blaming this woman, but it's like I was the bull in a china shop the whole time.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they set it up beforehand that they have set a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it should be a big deal. It's interesting to know to see it.
Yeah. So I think that's my unearned moment.
Yeah. Any other superlatives jumping out to you?
Favorite aria. Let's just do that. Best music in the thing.
I think it's Michaela's the one. I think it's the one in Act 3 where she comes in and is like, I have to do this thing. I'm going to face my fear. I'm going to, I just think it's so beautiful.
It's really beautiful. It's like she's the soprano in the role. It's just like so gorgeous because Carmen is a mezzo soprano, so it's all lower, a little bit dramatic.
She's sensual.
Yeah. And Michaela has like this very beautiful
soft.
High. It's really, really pleasant.
Gorgeous. I mean, and that actress, that singer was really
very, very good.
Incredible.
And I think my aria is La Fleur. I love La Fleur. It's Don José singing like right after she's like, "You don't love me," and he's like, "Oh my God, I do." Yeah. It's this beautiful like athletic tenor aria that I aspire someday to sing. We shall see. I love it. Yeah, that's my superlatives. Thank you so much for listening or for watching. This has been Then a Moment. You can follow us at thenamomentpod.com, Then a Moment Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or if you have any notes or questions or suggestions for stuff for us to watch and talk about or disagree with us, you can email us, thenamomentpod@gmail.com.
I'm Colin Funk, and remember, life is more fun when you're Tory adorable. Stupid.
Oh my God, that's awful. Boo. Gosh.
Come on, he was the most fun.
Yeah. I'm Pavi Proczko, and remember, Carmen, more like car woman.
Oh my God, I can't respond to that.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh my God.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Then a Moment, a Pavitas production project, hosted by Colin Funk and Pavi Proczko. This podcast is produced by Chicago Podcast Studio. Our opening cartoon was created by Gloriu, and our theme song was composed by me, Pavi Proczko. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite listening platform. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Then a Moment Pod, all one word, for updates on new episodes and behind-the-scenes content. If you have any feedback, comments, concerns, or kudos, you can email us at thenamomentpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us wherever you can. It would help us out a bunch. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.